I want you all to imagine a scenario. Imagine you receive a random phone call from your internet provider accusing you of uploading illicit pornography. Obviously, you're shook by this, especially if that's not something you've done. But then the story complicates. You get a call an hour later from someone representing themselves as an agent with the Federal Trade Commission. They list for you every single credit card in your possession, by credit card number, by bank, and then they inform you that you're under investigation for wire fraud. Based on what you know today, if you received that call, what would you do? What steps would you take? Well, unfortunately for a Concord, California man, he wasn't armed with the information we're going to talk through today. And I'm going to tell you his story, but I want to relate it to a bigger context. Last week I shared with all of you that in that week alone, it was announced that 334 million records were compromised. This was a data breach of a background check company in Florida. So imagine every company you've ever applied for that's done a background check. Think about the information that they require in those background checks. Current address, current phone number, credit history, credit reports, history of arrest, social security numbers, relatives. And what I'm here to tell you today, and this Concord, California case is just an exact representation of the risks we now face, is every bit of that information can and is being weaponized against unsuspecting victims who aren't armed with the facts and don't know what steps they should take. And I'm here to tell you that cyber criminals, we have this perception of them when we get those phishing emails, right, that are suspect and there's typos and they're misspelled and they want us to click a link. Most of us are aware now, that is potentially a scam. Most of us know not to click on those things. Those are what we call one-off scam attempts, and they're far less productive than a more sophisticated scheme. Cyber criminals are organized, they're armed with your information, and they have strategies and they have playbooks, as was the case for this Concord, California man. So sit tight, I'm going to tell you his story, I'm going to tell you how it relates to the larger data breaches that have occurred, and hopefully by the end of this call, should you ever receive a random outreach from any official organization, you'll know the right steps to take to protect you, your loved ones, and your money. When Chester Frilich received the call from the person representing themselves as an FTC agent, first of all, the phone number was spoofed, so it looked legitimate. Chester was then told that his money was at risk. Everything he'd worked so hard in his life and saved up for was at risk. But the agent had a plan, and he laid out this plan to have Chester move all of his money to quote-unquote safe accounts. So Chester went to his bank. He closed out his CDs. He went to his retirement planning company. He cashed in his IRA. And he followed the instructions and moved $200,000 to the accounts that he was directed to by this person representing themselves as an FTC agent. Well, I'm sure you know where the story ends. Unfortunately, that money was moved and moved again and is now untraceable. The bank notified him that he was probably the victim of a scam, and by then it was too late. But then more bad news came. Because he cashed in the CDs early, because he cashed in the IRAs early, there were withdrawal penalties assessed. $30,000 assessed by the IRS. So imagine, not just has he lost his entire life savings, but the home he had fully paid for, now with no money to pay the $30,000 IRS lien, there's a lien placed against his house, and he's at risk of losing it. So how does this connect to the 334 million records that were stolen? First, what you have to know is that There are very sophisticated cyber criminals behind these ploys. It is not people one-off. You've heard the 280-pound man in his mother's basement enacting these scams. That's not the case. As I shared with you in one of the previous episodes, in the country of Myanmar alone, the UN estimates that there are over 120,000 human trafficking victims captured by Southeast Asian gangs, put into a compound, held at gunpoint under threat of, torture, imprisonment, even death, given playbooks, assigned managers, and their sole job, 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day, is to reach out to potential victims and enact these scams. Furthermore, these 334 million records, not alone by any stretch, but as an example, are all available on the dark web. So let's get back to that background check company and let's refresh on the information that was hacked. Every address you've ever lived in, every member of your family, your credit history, your arrest records, your phone number, all of this information builds this powerful construct and narrative that was used against someone like Chester in Concord, California, to appear very legitimate. In his mind, he said to himself, I'm sure they know all my credit card numbers, so they must have access to my financial history. That was the piece of legitimacy that could pivot this from the fear factor of something bad's going to happen to you to the social proof that we are who we say we are, which then legitimizes the ask and the take. And that's exactly what happened to Chester. Really sad story. Here's how simple this is. The Federal Trade Commission has stated, in fact, emphatically, they will never contact you proactively. Never, ever call you by phone. If you get a message from someone purporting themselves to be from the FTC or any government agency, hang up, look up their official number online, call back, and tell whoever answers, I received a message from someone that claimed they were from the FTC, and I wanted to know if it was legitimate, so I disconnected the call and I'm calling back. Had Chester just have done these things, he would have found out that this was a scammer, right? I've shared with you that the voice cloning AI capability has advanced such that cyber criminals can get a 5 to 15 second recording of your voice, run it through AI, give it a script, and recreate it. So in addition to these government calls, if you ever get a call from a loved one or a family member who represents themselves as being in trouble, maybe they're in jail, in prison, there's a lot of DUI related kind of scams being run where, it's called the grandmother and grandfather scam. Grandma, I need help, I'm in jail, I hit another car, there was a pregnant woman in the car, she's dead, and I need money for bail, or I need money to hire an attorney, or whatever that may be. It's very simple what you can do. There are 2 steps you can take. One is, right now, talk to your loved ones and family members and establish a code. And if you ever get a phone call, before you take any action financially, ask that person calling you for the code. Whatever it is, Pineapple Express, onions, whatever that code is, they should know what that code is. Secondly, and just as easy, tell them you're going to call them right back and call their number. There was a case in, and I forget which state it was, where a grandmother had received a call that her granddaughter was in jail and, in this DUI scenario. And unbeknownst to the scammer, the granddaughter was upstairs sleeping, and obviously the grandmother knew that, this was a fake call. But there was a couple in Pennsylvania who received a similar call about their daughter. The call was made by a person representing themselves as a policeman, and they said, we're going to put your daughter on the phone. The voice that they heard, these parents heard, was so convincing that they were sure it was their daughter. She cried on the phone, she was under stress, and the parents were quoted as saying, We know what she sounds like when she's under duress. This was our daughter. Well, as you might have guessed, it was an AI recreation of the daughter. The next day, they were instructed to wire $15,000, to have $15,000 withdrawn from their bank. A courier showed up at their house, took the money from them. An hour or so after that, they got a second call and said, that's not going to be enough, we need an additional $15,000. They went back to their bank, they withdrew an additional $15,000. Another courier showed up, took the money, and it wasn't until later where their daughter or their son-in-law just randomly called them to check in and say hello, and they discovered that this whole thing was completely fraudulent. And as you might have guessed, there's no way to get their $30,000 back. So again, we have to pay attention to the amount of data that's been stolen, that's available on the dark web, your social media profiles, everything about your background, where you've worked, who your family members are, where you live now, where you've lived, your credit history, your credit cards, any history of arrest. You have to assume that someone who knows those things may or may not be legitimate. They may have purchased it off the dark web, and you have to take very easy, common sense steps to protect yourself so that you, unlike Chester, don't fall victim to these scams. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. My name is Philip Macko. I'm a 5-time published author and host of the Muddy Waters YouTube series and podcast. I want to invite you to, if you got something from this video, please like it, please share it. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe. And I hope you'll continue to join me. My whole goal and mission after 3 friends of mine were scammed collectively this year out of over $500,000 is just to help the public become aware of the risk, how the scams are enacted, and what you can do to keep yourself safe. So I want to thank you for tuning in. I hope you're having a great weekend. Hope to see you in the next episode.